Do men and women deal with breakup differently? Have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, the tools work for everybody, but I find, and I don't like to generalize because everybody's so different. And so we don't have a sort of one size fits all because everyone is so different. It really depends, interestingly, on what your ability to cope with stress is already. So we all have friends who, when the tiniest thing happened, fall apart. Like I was in the supermarket the other day and I bumped into a friend I haven't seen for ages, and she's amazing. But she was so stressed. She said, Sara, I'm having such a bad day. And I was like, what's happened? And she said, my daughter's getting a flight and I didn't have any bread in to make her a sandwich for the trip to the airport. So I'm here trying to grab it. And I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, is this why you're so upset? Because literally, how do you get through the day? Whereas other people can seem to take on so much and deal with all sorts of grief and difficulties from their past and difficult kids or illness.
And it doesn't affect their
so
walk.
that's a real indicator, actually, for how people are going to cope when you start putting breakup and divorce on top of that.
Right. Now, I've read that you said, and it's more than you, there's been studies that heartbreak can have an effect on you physically and emotionally, obviously. But the physical characteristics of that, what are you seeing in that? It can make you sick, right?
Yeah. I mean, it actually weirdly feels like a real physical injury. Like it feels like your heart is hurting.
And I've always said a breakup is like worse than having a broken leg. I mean, it is so painful and so hard. You know, with a broken leg, a doctor will say, here's what it's going to feel like. Here's when it's going to end. Here's when it's going to mend. And a broken heart, you just go through so many stages. But that physical sickness it could really hurt people though. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. It actually feels like this physical injury, even though it's not. And that manifests in so many different ways. It's not just going to affect you from your sleeping. It's going to stop you from concentrating. It's going to affect your ability to parent. It's going to affect your ability to show up and even do basic tasks. So I think we've got to look at the impact on your body, because if you don't face that, then that's what you drag forward with you. And I think a lot of people, what I call do the stuffing down of emotions. And stuffing your emotions means that you're not facing it, you're just distracting away from that. But actually a lot of trauma is stored in the body. So, often there's the sort of tsunami of stress hormones that hits you as well. And I think that's something where when you're used to the oxytocin and the dopamine of it all being amazing and being in love, especially if you didn't realize this was coming, and then the next thing you're hit by all these stress hormones, that's what makes you feel sort of anxious and sluggish and pretty lousy, to be honest. So I think navigating your way through that, a lot of people just curl up and say, that's it. Whereas what we need to do is actually face that and do some work. And actually, you can't think your way out of overthinking, and a lot of people try and do that. What we need to do is move our bodies. We need to change our physiology and get outside, connect with nature, start doing things that change that environment, because as we start to move, that starts to shift how we're looking at the world. And if you can do that, and it doesn't need to be going to the gym if you're not a gym bunny, but it does need to be something that just gets you outside.
So many people get stuck. I know for me, I've been stuck. Like, you're in a bad relationship, and we don't even need to just talk about divorce. It's just breakups in general, right? But people don't know when the end is the end. And so many people are stuck. It could be for weeks or years. And is it the right time to leave this person? And then there's so many makeups and breakups and, back and forth. And that takes a toll too. I mean, I've been in that position where I don't feel like I can parent. I can't focus on anything in front of me. It's consuming me in my head. And so that brings me to my next question about, when do we know that it's time? I mean, obviously there are relationships, especially marriages, that you want to try and make it work for the sake of the kids or whatever. But they're also, I meet plenty of people that are like, oh, I stayed married for the sake of the kids. I am a product of two parents that are divorced. If my parents stayed married, that would have been the biggest disaster in my life. But I know a lot of adults think they should stay for the kids. What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I think that if you're staying for the kids, you've got to be very aware of what you're teaching them, of what marriage and love is. Right. Because we are their role models, whether we like it or not, whether we're trying to hide it or put on a great smiley face.
And they see everything.
Absolutely. And they hear everything. Even when you're whispering to your friend with the bathroom door shut, they're still going to pick up on that. Right. Even when they're babies energetically, they pick up on how you're feeling.
Right.
So I think I know it comes from a good place, saying we want to stay together for the kids. But in my experience, kids growing up in that unhealthy dynamic where they're learning that marriage means potentially, not sleeping in the same room or not being kind to each other, or it's okay to just speak in an unfiltered way and express all the negatives about your partner, put them down, be unkind.
Right.
Is
or
that
the
what
cheating that goes along with it. Yeah.
Absolutely, the betrayal, and just, oh no, everything's fine. Because we're teaching our kids then, if you're saying, well, I know they cheated, but I'm staying anyway, that's okay to tolerate that bad behavior. So there are boundaries about what is acceptable behavior.
And what love is.
And what love is. It's
wrong.
completely skewed from maybe the ideal healthy way of looking at that kind of relationship.
I agree. There are a lot of people, tends to be women, but I don't think it's always women, that stay for financial reasons. They feel like they've been in this relationship, they've been taken care of, they maybe are raising the kids, or maybe they're just in a financial situation where it's comfortable, but the relationship is abusive or not comfortable. But they stay because they don't have any options. They think they haven't been in the workforce for many years. How are they going to get a job? How are they going to be their own person without the other one, right? What would your suggestion be for people that are stuck in those situations?
I see this all the time, Rachel, and it is really sad because sometimes it is very difficult to leave because of financial reasons, or your life is going to change so much if you do that, you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. And I work with clients to not jump into it just because of the emotional in that moment. I'm leaving, that's it. I always say, let's get a plan. Let's get your ducks in a row, and let's work out financially, what do you need? And let's look at the future, because just jumping, there's going to be situations like in some abusive relationships where maybe it's not safe to stay. And that I'm not talking about those, because in that case, you need to get the right help from your community support services for domestic abuse. But if it's a relationship where you're just unhappy and it's not for you, don't rush into making those decisions, because it can be a planning process. And you don't have to, when you've got a plan, you start to feel a bit more in control. When you start to have that confidence and more certainty about your future, it becomes more tolerable to stay whilst you're doing that. It's not necessarily something that you would share with your partner, though. It's something that is for you to start thinking about. Let's look at what the future looks like. We'd never leave our house in the morning without knowing where we were going, right? Because, well, you wouldn't know whether you got there or not, really. Right. So we don't want to jump out of a marriage without knowing what that looks like. So most people will say to me, it either looks like a black hole or a blank canvas. And what we have to do, and that's what I do as a coach and my coaches do, is to either shine a light into that black hole or put some color on the canvas. So it gives you a focus of where you've yet to go and what that looks like.